Oh, hey, real quick, just want to answer a question that I'm sure you're asking yourself right now. The answer is no. You do not need to have seen the Artemis Fowl movie, or read the Artemis Fowl books for that matter, to understand and appreciate this video. So, enjoy. I never expected to be making a video about Artemis Fowl. I mean, I wasn't even convinced I'd see it, and I see everything. I saw The Fantastic Crimes of Grindelwald multiple times, a movie I hate, but I've never read the books about Artemis Fowl. I have very little knowledge of the character, and I'd more or less forgotten that this movie was even coming out. But Artemis Fowl does something so strange, something I have never seen a movie do before, that I feel like I need to tell you about it. So join me, won't you? On a strange and unbelievable journey to once and for all uncover the truth behind the curious editing of Artemis Fowl. You seem to have a pure and unspoiled heart, which means you probably haven't seen 2019's 2020's Disney Plus's Artemis Fowl. So let me give you the necessary information to understand this video. Artemis Fowl is a movie produced by Walt Disney, directed by Kenneth Branagh. That's right, this is a Gilderoy Lockhart joint. It's allegedly based on the popular children's book series of the same name by Irish author Owen Colfer. The books tell the story of a child criminal mastermind, Artemis Fowl, described as a Hans Gruber type, who causes trouble, goes on adventures in the hidden world of fairies that exists just below the surface of the earth. The movie is kinda that. Artemis Fowl is a child, and there are fairies, but he isn't much of a criminal mastermind until the very end of the movie, where he calls the villain and tells them that he is. Artemis himself is played by Farinda Shaw. The supporting cast includes a young fairy cop named Holly Short, played by Laura McDonnell, a troublesome dwarf named Mulch Diggins, played by Josh Gad, Artemis's trusty butler/bodyguard named Domavoy Butler, played by Nonzo Ananzie, and it wouldn't be a late 20-teens disaster without an appearance by Dame Judi Dench as Fairy Police Chief Commander Root. Here's the plot. Artemis's dad, Artemis Fowl Sr., played by Colin Farrell, who rolled off the set of a Dolce & Gabbana commercial, is kidnapped by the bad guy, who cares, and to rescue his father, Artemis puts in motion a master plan that centers around a fairy kidnapping, hostage negotiation, and a troll bullfight. By the way, in this series, fairies is a catch-all term for pixies, dwarfs, trolls, and other magical creatures. It's not explained super well in the movie, but that's a helpful thing to know. Now, this movie is not good. I have a feeling Disney would have dumped this on Disney Plus with or without a hopefully once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. This movie fails on every level. It is boring, confusing, filled with exposition, weird accents, some of the worst fight choreography I have ever seen, Josh Gad dislodging his jaw and pooping out dirt, and surprise, surprise, this movie has been in the works forever. Plans were made in 2001, which just happened to be the first year that a certain series that shall not be named was turned into a movie. It wasn't until 2015 when Branagh was attached, and it was originally scheduled to be released in 2019. But a couple months before it was expected to be released, it was pushed back a year to 2020. There was no specific reason that was given. People speculated it may have had something to do with Disney just wanting to put a different movie in that release date. But this is where things get interesting. There was some speculation that this delay had something to do with reshoots. There were some extremely negative reactions to the genuinely confusing first trailer, and it would make sense that Disney may want to make some changes before they release the final product. Makes sense. After all, reshoots are a normal thing. Lots of movies have them. Avengers Endgame had some reshoots, some pretty serious ones from all accounts. But it was still awesome. Like, reshoots don't mean that a movie is bad. However, while reshoots don't always equal bad movie very frequently equals reshoots. Justice League, Suicide Squad, Fant Four Stick, Rise of Skywalker, Dark Phoenix, Doolittle. Not good. Some truly awful movies, all of which represent a significant studio investment in not only one movie, but a franchise. Or in Doolittle's case, a potential franchise that cannot afford a flop. So after a negative test screening, there are usually reshoots. But most movies cannot be fixed that easily. That list I just told you is a pretty good example of why. Fan Four Stick, Justice League, those movies had fundamental issues that reshoots could not address. And then the reshoots just end up creating a Frankenstein's monster situation. Not only do the big issues remain, but now we're dealing with tonal issues, the story's disjointed, characters act differently scene to scene, wigs, mustaches. I understand why reshoots have such a bad reputation. And upon first glance, it seemed like Artemis Fowl had some reshoots. And that would explain the year break. And it would explain the clunky story and all of the constant exposition. And specifically the runner where Mulch Diggums was being interrogated by MI6, that felt like it was added after the fact to explain more interesting bits of Fairy World to the audience. But I don't think that is all that happened. I think Disney did something much weirder. You see, in post-production, there's something called ADR, stands for either automated or additional dialogue replacement. Basically, if there's an issue with the audio from a movie, maybe there was too much background noise or the original line read wasn't clear, instead of reshooting the scene, producers will have the actor re-record their line to match the original shot. The actor will show up to a recording studio, watch the scene again, and attempt to mimic their own voice. That's a big part of what we think of as ADR, and you barely ever notice it. But then there's the other kind. Say your movie is confusing. Test audiences don't get it, which doesn't mean it's actually that confusing. Test audiences are tricky. If you don't know what I mean, look up David F. Sandberg's video about test audiences. It's funny. But, say you need to explain what the Infinity Stones are, because the test audience is confused. You may have an actor record an additional line where they explain it, and then add that line into the movie, maybe over some images, or a wide shot where you can't really see the character's lips moving clearly, or take a shot of the back of that character's head, or another character seemingly reacting to the speaker. That way it fits pretty seamlessly into the scene. And usually, audiences don't notice those either. But I just knew something was off about Artemis Fowl, something not quite right. The story didn't make sense and the editing was insane, erratic, upsetting. Then friend of the channel, Owen Lars 2, brought something to my attention. They sent a very interesting thread of tweets to myself, DJ, and Diggins after we covered Artemis Fowl on our podcast, Mostly Nitpicking. Please subscribe. The thread reads, I just finished the Artemis Fowl episode and wanted to share with y'all my theory on why the movie is so astronomically bad. I think something happened that made half of the film scenes unusable. So they Frankensteined it. A few minutes into the film, I realized that almost no one on screen ever talked. There was plenty of dialogue, but it all came from off-screen, or in scenes where we don't see the characters' mouths. I think this is most painfully obvious in the scene where Juliet brings Artemis a sandwich. She says the word eat on screen, and then there is 40 seconds of pure dialogue before we see Artemis get to say a line on screen. Almost the entire scene seems to have been done in ADR. I think something happened with what they had filmed that caused much of it to be unusable. Maybe the hard drives of the digital copies got damaged, or some legal issue came up with using what was filmed. Whatever happened, I think they were forced to piece together remains. Pick any 5 minutes of the movie and really pay attention to how much ADR and over-editing went into it. If you got a good TV, you may even notice some digital seams from putting characters into scenes they were not filmed in. This is my weird conspiracy theory, but I think it would go a long way to explain how this film failed so much harder than $125 million should ever have allowed. The presence of ADR creates an interesting opportunity. We can get an idea of what may have been changed after the fact, and specifically what was added. So after watching the movie again, I can confidently say that at least one major plot point exists almost exclusively in ADR, and that is the Aculos. But Nando, you may be thinking, we see the Aculos. Our characters hold it. There's no way they ADR'd all of that. To that I say correct. From that point on, exactly 1 hour into the movie, I do believe characters are talking about the Aculos. I believe it existed in every cut of the movie from that point forward. But before that, let's take a look. Join me, won't you? Welcome to the Aculos Zone. This is the part of my apartment where I go to obsess about the Aculos. Don't believe me? Here, check this out. This is my whiteboard that I use for my Patreon exclusive monthly whiteboard videos. On it, I have taken the liberty of writing down the line and timestamp of every time the word Aculos is used before the hour mark. So before we actually see the Aculos, it is mentioned 29 times. Once it's part of a crawl, I didn't include that, but 29 times a character says the word Aculos. Now, couple of observations about that. These three here, these are part of the Mulch Diggum's interrogation runner. So is this one here, Artemis wanted the Aculos. So those 4 were 100% part of reshoots. Take away those 4 and you're left with 25. 25 times that a character uses the word Aculos on or off screen before we see the Aculos an hour into the movie. So I want to ask you a question. Out of those 25 times, how many times do you think we clearly see a character say Aculos? Like, we're not looking at the back of their head, we're not looking at another character, we're not looking at some illustration or some image vaguely related to the Aculos. We see a person's lips move, and it's clear that Aculos is what word is coming out of their lips. Out of 25. Take a guess. Put it in the comments. You ready? 5. Out of 25 times, we see the word Aculos actually spoken 5 times. That means the other 20 times a character says the word Aculos before we actually see it, it's off screen. And it is so clearly ADR. The actual instances are bizarre. I'll show you a couple of them. Like this one. The villain is approaching this underling named Raya Kudgeon. Raya is told that he's being released so that he can help villain steal the Aculos. But watch the shot. See if anything stands out to you.
All charges dropped. I've convinced the executors to grant a pardon after your court-martial. Commander Root was powerless to stop it.
The villain does not move, like at all. He's perfectly still. The only movement at all in this shot is some CGI smoke. And look, here it is again. I'm willing to bet that all of this was just one image that they throw up whenever the villain needs to explain how what she's doing ties into the plot. How about this one? Judi Dench is about to give a speech about the Aculos where she conveniently never clearly says the word Aculos on screen. But before Root speaks, just off screen, some random character throws this gem in.
Knock it off!
And then Root says,
"You've seen the news.
Quick cutaway to,
The Aculos is still missing.
and back for the next line.
Cal, Virgo, B Squad, C Squad, you're all on triple night duty downtown."
Also not sure what this weird globe thingy is, but it makes a real handy Judi Dench mouth hider. And just to put the cherry on top of this ADR nightmare, we get one more mention of the Aculos from the back of Root's head that sounds nothing like the lines that precede or follow it.
See it and report it. We must recover the Aculos and protect our anonymity.
And then there's this scene between Juliet and Artemis where virtually no dialogue is spoken on screen, but that scene is followed by this one, Foley's introduction, where he, Root, and Holly discuss a rogue fairy. And unlike so much of this movie, almost every line is spoken on screen, except, and I swear this is the real edit in the movie,
all active duty officers are downtown, searching for the Aculos.
but my personal favorite, the negotiation. Root is invited into Fowl Manor to negotiate for Holly's freedom, and most of the dialogue is on camera, and it almost kinda works as a scene, until we start talking about, you guessed it, the Aculos. First we get this preposterous overhead shot of the table when Artemis first mentions the Aculos, and then what may be the most telling individual edit in the movie. Root says,
I beg your pardon.
and then, from the back of his head, we hear Artemis say,
You heard me. The Aculos.
and then we go right to Artemis's face for,
In one of those pots. From under a rainbow, I presume.
now I don't know much about Aculoses. I mean, since the Aculos only exists in this movie, and considering how many times I've seen the movie, I actually may be the world's foremost authority on Aculoses. But, from what my expert opinion can reveal, this line doesn't track with anything we've heard thus far in the movie. The Aculos is not in a pot. If anything, it's an acorn, so I guess it'd be under a tree. But let's imagine the word Aculos was ADR'd in post-production. That line makes a lot more sense if Artemis asks for the gold that he is originally after in the books. I want a ton of fairy gold. I beg your pardon. You heard me. Gold. in one of those pots from under a rainbow, I presume. So, I am completely convinced that all 20 times the word Aculos is spoken off screen are last-minute ADR to write the gold out of the story. But why? Why make these changes? Why go through all of this trouble? I have two theories. First one's simple. This is a kid's movie, and two plot devices are confusing, so getting rid of the gold and making the entire movie about the quest for the Aculos should, in theory, make the plot easier for a child to follow. I would argue that the Aculos and all of the other fairy magic is the far more confusing plot device of the two, but hey, that's a possible explanation. The other explanation is both dumber and, in my opinion, far more likely. So earlier I said that the character of Artemis is a criminal mastermind, described as a Hans Gruber type. For those of you who aren't familiar, Hans Gruber is the iconic villain from the 1980s action film Die Hard. He's played by Alan Rickman in one of my favorite performances in any movie. He is cool, calm, sassy, he's having fun, and all the while you have complete confidence that he will kill anyone if they get in his way. Or, in the case of Ellis, if they annoy him. And even though Hans seems like a terrorist out to use this hostage situation to free other freedom fighters, we eventually learn that he's only in it for a safe filled with bearer bonds. There are a lot of sides to Hans. He's always surprising you. And because of his unpredictability mixed with his natural charisma, Hans Gruber is a joy to watch. He's constantly oscillating between likable and unlikable throughout the film. Like Hans, Artemis is the villain of the first book. The first scene in the first book is even Artemis torturing a fairy for information, which we'll get to. Over the course of the series, he becomes slightly more heroic, but in the beginning of the first book, Artemis is the villain. I believe Disney was concerned about making the hero a villain, even if later in the movie he gets redeemed by using the Aculos to find his dad and giving it to Holly. I believe Disney wanted this to be their franchise that shall not be named. Okay, they wanted a Harry Potter, a child-focused novel based on a series of books they could use to sell toys and plays and eventually turn it into a theme park. But Artemis Fowl is not Harry Potter. He's a jerk. He's arrogant, scheming, an anti-hero. And by trying to turn Artemis into Harry Potter, Disney stripped Artemis of his defining characteristic, so they were left with nothing. A main character who was detached, bland, and cliché for no good reason. The craziest part of this to me is that it isn't like Disney was just chasing trends. They were chasing the wrong trends. I would understand if a sanitized Artemis Fowl movie were released in the 2000s, but the 2010s have been nothing but anti-heroes. Deadpool, Venom, Dredd, Hellboy, Kingsman, Maleficent, the Guardians of the Galaxy, Logan, Joker, Parasite, John Wick, Solo, Rogue One, Baby Driver, Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey, Mad Max, Sherlock Holmes, morally dubious, unconventional heroes. Hell, two of the most profitable franchises in Hollywood currently are the Fast and the Furious movies and the Despicable Me series. People like this. A pitch along the lines of, it's Harry Potter, but he's kind of a jerk. Feels like a slam dunk. But I wonder if this sanitization had something to do with streaming. And this is all purely speculative from this point on, but go with me on this one. You ever wonder why online trailers put those little 5-second clips of the end of the trailer at the beginning of the trailer? Like Brightburn, one of the best trailers of the last decade. For that movie about what if Superman but the Omen? That trailer begins like a shot-for-shot remake of Man of Steel. Same fields, color grading, music, but about halfway in you learn that something's wrong with Brandon and the trailer switches gears to reveal that this is actually a horror movie. It is an incredibly effective trailer. Well, if you watch it on Sony's official YouTube channel, the Brightburn trailer starts with a shot of the horror movie finale, which completely undercuts all of the Man of Steel style buildup. But they did it anyway. Why? Well, according to an article on The Verb by Chris Pallant, the structure is built for the new way people discover videos on the internet. The Independence Day trailer may run as an advertisement before another YouTube video, and viewers must be convinced to not click the skip ad button. Or the trailer may be shared on Facebook, in which case those who come across it, people who may have their smartphones or laptops muted, must be convinced in a couple seconds to stop scrolling and give the full video a trailer. About what you'd expect. But Chris continues and hits on something really interesting. The teaser within the trailer speaks to a moment in which we have so many distractions and choices that marketers must sell us on giving a trailer 3 minutes of our time. And I believe that may have something to do with why Artemis Fowl was edited the way it was. When it comes to streaming, we have so many distractions and choices. Besides the other content on Disney Plus, we can choose one of the other streaming services or watch cable or YouTube. They all come from the same place through the same interface. Watching a new movie before streaming was a very different kind of choice. Say you have 2 hours and you decide you want to watch a movie. You either look up a movie ahead of time or pick one at the theater. From the moment you buy the ticket, you have a binary choice. Either you stay and watch the movie or you leave and don't, which feels like more of an investment in that movie. You don't have a million other options unless you're willing to pay for another one. Streaming does not work the same way. We need to decide a few minutes into streaming a movie whether we want to watch it or not. And if the answer is no, then we can switch to any other service and watch any other movie from the beginning. There's almost no investment, no consequences to stopping a movie and starting something new. And that's kind of what I'm afraid of. Perhaps originally Artemis Fowl was unlikable, purposefully so. And by the end of the movie, he has a slight redemption arc that turns him into a more likable hero. Over the course of the movie, you learn about his character, what he really cares about. Maybe you learn about his mom, who was apparently cast in the movie, and like what happened to her, but whatever. You empathize with Artemis, and by the end of the movie, we are on Artemis's side. But if your audience is a streaming audience, maybe they won't enjoy that first 10 minutes of a movie where the main character is a jerk. Maybe they'll switch to something else with a more Harry Potter-esque hero, and they'll never see that development. So like the Brightburn trailer, this movie needs to throw out all subtlety and please the crowd from the beginning. You think he's just after gold? No, Artemis wants to use the Oculus to save his dad, because he's a good boy, like Harry Potter. In fact, forget about the gold. The Fowls don't care about gold. Cut all references to it, even though we filmed an entire ending where Artemis cleverly escapes the time freeze, wakes up, and finds a bunch of gold. And my best piece of evidence to support this motivation is a deleted scene, which you can find on Disney Plus. It's kind of tricky. Here's how you do it. In this scene, Artemis and Butler travel to Vietnam, find a fairy, and then torture her so they can take pictures of her book, which they could seemingly use to learn information about the fairy world. This scene is almost completely finished. It features Hong Chow, who played Lady True in HBO's Watchmen, watch it, and parts of this scene even made it into the first trailer. It also happens to be the first scene of the first book, so why leave it out? Well, the Artemis in this scene is characterized very differently than the one we see in the movie. Artemis is ruthless, uncaring, even a little cruel, but he gets what he wants. This is the Artemis book fans recognize. But what if this were also the first scene in the movie? Even though the kid turns out okay in the end, is he so unlikable that people won't watch past the first few minutes? I think he might be. Disney knows what they're doing. I mean, clearly if they knew what they were doing, this movie would be good, but I have a feeling Disney did their homework, conducted tons of focus groups, screened an original cut of Artemis Fowl, and watched the dial turn immediately from like to dislike. And then they made a decision. Rewrite the movie without shooting it. Change lines, plot devices. And instead of making the main character an unlikable villain who's after gold, he can be a brave hero who is after the fairy equivalent of an infinity stone. Regardless of how the movie played out, Artemis needed to be just heroic enough that the audiences never disliked him long enough to watch something else. And I think that sucks. Oh, and one more thing. So I am clearly not a huge fan of the Artemis Fowl movie. I do want to tell you about the one legitimately good thing that I think came out of this movie. And it's, it doesn't have that much to do with the actual movie, but here we go. One of the trailers for the movie featured a song by an artist called Campfire. The song is called Start It Up, and it's just a fun pump-up song that I listen to before I record a video or a podcast to get me amped. You may recognize Campfire as the band that made the song Superhuman, which was from Marvel Spider-Man PS4's launch trailer, which is also a fun pump-up song. And if you're like me and you're at home and you want to listen to a nice little pump-up song, I would definitely recommend doing it on headphones made by this video's sponsor, Raycon. So that's apparently how these are going to go. Raycon sponsorships are going to feature me talking about music that I like. So if you want to keep hearing about those, I would definitely think about buying a pair of Raycons. Raycon makes premium wireless headphones and earbuds that start around half of the price of others on the market. I've actually had a pair of Raycons for a while, and like a lot of you, I've been spending a lot of time indoors recently. And it's really nice to just throw your wireless earbuds in and listen to a podcast or an audiobook. Like if you want to listen to the original book of Artemis Fowl, whatever you're doing, you've got your music, your podcasts, your audiobooks, wherever you go. They sound as amazing as the other top audio brands you guys know. And their latest model, the Everyday E25s, are their best one yet. With 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, more bass, and a more compact design that gives you a nice noise-isolating fit. It also comes in fun new colorways. And click the link in the description below, buyraycon.com/Nando, and get 15% off of your order. It is that easy. Raycon, use them to listen to podcasts, videos, Artemis Fowl audiobooks, and cool pump-up music like Started Up by Campfire. Hey, as always, I have to give a humongous thank you to everyone who continues to support the channel on Patreon, because you guys are the best. If you want to see your name up here, get access to videos early, other cool stuff, like if you want to watch or even choose the topics for my whiteboard videos. I use this whiteboard, it's attached to a wall, and it's not covered in Aculos research, but if you want to be part of those videos, join the Patreon. If you want to be part of the new tier that I am about to start, I think I'm going to have to limit it, maybe like 20 patrons or something like that. We did a pilot program of a book club where we all read Kingdom Come and discussed it, and it's a really, really fun experience. I had a great time. I think everybody really enjoyed it. So I think that's going to be an official tier. Keep an eye out for that on the Patreon. I will tweet about it, and yeah, you have no idea how much I appreciate it. Also, definitely subscribe to my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, where every week me and my friends DJ and Diggins pick apart a piece of pop culture by looking exclusively at the details. We did what I think is like a 2+ hour episode on just the Artemis Fowl movie, which is really interesting. We recently did an episode on Quibi. We're going to be doing episodes on whatever new thing is released or whatever old thing you guys want us to talk about. Tweet us suggestions. We're at NitPickingPod on Twitter. Last thing, as always, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and now TikTok. My handle is NandoVMovies on all of those. It's where I post updates on videos, podcasts, talk about Artemis Fowl, show pictures of my cat. It's all great stuff. Oh, and the tease for a future video is an X-Men thing. I'm really excited. You guys know I love the X-Men. It was just the 20th anniversary of the first X-Men movie, so I am going to be making an X-Men video that I'm very excited about very soon. That is all I've got. I'll see you next time.